All right, today we're going to talk about boundaries. I'm sure you've all heard about that. You hear it all the time, people saying, I've got a boundary on this, or you need to set clear and healthy boundaries, and it's in our culture, but very few people talk about how to do that, what boundaries are, and how to set them. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Classically, what people are saying when they say healthy boundaries is limits on what we consider acceptable behavior towards us. And we just sort of expect that people around us will respect our boundaries. An example of this might be our spouse or significant other who gets angry all the time and screams and yells and is verbally abusive. Right? And so we might say, hey, it is unacceptable the way that you're screaming and yelling at me all the time. I'm not going to stand for it. You need to control your emotions. This is the type of boundary that people often express is, here's a behavior that I don't like and I don't want, and I'm going to tell you so that you can stop it. This is my boundary. Here's the problem I have with this kind of boundary is that it abdicates all personal responsibility. We have a boundary and we're putting all of the responsibility on maintaining the boundary on other people, on the very people who don't maintain it by default. And so it really sets us up for failure. So I'm going to define boundaries a bit differently. The way I define them is this. Boundaries are the area in our life that we claim full responsibility for. This is a very different way of seeing boundaries. It's not just telling people, this is how I don't want you to behave. It's, this is an area that's all my responsibility, and I'm going to make sure that things happen in here the way that I want them to. All right, boundaries are the way that we care for ourselves and we respect ourselves. And here's the most important part. Boundaries are for us to abide by, not other people. That's critical. All right, so how do we, what does a boundary look like in this model? There's two parts to it. Number one is defining the boundary. To define a boundary is a boundary. The only reason we would set a boundary is because there's a point after which we don't feel safe. In some physical, mental, emotional way, our health and safety is at risk. At least we think so. And so the boundary that we define is, there is the red line, and anything that crosses that line is my boundary. I don't feel safe after that. So the second part, and this is the part that most people miss, is asserting the boundary. So how do we assert a boundary? It's a way that we bring ourselves back to a point where that boundary is not violated. We make sure that we are no longer in a position of unsafety, which means it's on us to make some sort of action. So asserting a boundary is our predefined response when somebody crosses that boundary. So if we go back to our example, our spouse comes to us and we say, hey, I consider it completely unacceptable that you yell and scream at me all the time. If that continues, I'm going to break up with you and I'm going to move out. Now, this isn't a threat. It's not a manipulation. It's not a punishment. It's a response. It's a way that we are going to respond to someone else when they cross a boundary that we have set and told them about, in order for us to respect ourselves, in order for us to put ourselves back into a position of safety. Now, when we treat boundaries this way, we have a whole lot more freedom to make sure that they are respected, because we're the only ones that need to respect the boundary. It's us taking an action. We can't actually control the way other people think or speak or behave. We can only, at best, influence them. We can only really control what we do. And so if we're going to maintain healthy boundaries, then they need to be things that we do to respect ourselves. This is how I see boundaries and how I think that we can be setting them better. Now, there's a caveat here, right? And that some boundaries are really easy to set and maintain, and some are really difficult. If you were in an abusive relationship, then saying to somebody, this is unacceptable behavior, I'm going to leave, that could actually put you in further danger. And so I'm not suggesting that merely doing this is always the right thing to do. This is more of I wanted to get a distinction out there between setting a boundary as request for a different type of behavior versus setting boundary as taking responsibility for our health and safety and having an action and a response that we're going to go through when that boundary is violated. Please let me know what you think. If this is helpful, if you have thoughts or comments or disagreements, please put them in the comments below.